Here we go with part 6 of our series, Basic Checkmates You Must Know. We have king and queen against king. Now things will start to get a bit more complicated than the previous parts of this series where we had 2 pieces plus our own king, and we didn't even need the king to checkmate. Now we need the king to help checkmate. So the easiest way to think about the king and queen against king, and also the next part of the series where we'll have king and rook against king, is to look at the squares that the black king has remaining. So in this position, our queen cuts off this diagonal. She cuts off the whole E file. Our king cuts off these squares on the second rank. So if you look at the squares that the black king has remaining, he will most likely have to go back to D4 or C4. And then these squares up here are also eventually available. They aren't cut off yet. So the goal here is we want to keep shrinking this area available to the black king. So the easiest first move here is going to be queen to E2 check. So now you see the queen cuts off the whole second rank, and she still cuts off the whole E file. She also cuts off the diagonal, but you don't have to worry too much about the diagonal. So now you can think of this as sort of a box for the black king. The black king must remain in this box, and we want to keep shrinking the box move after move. So let's say the king goes to C3. Now the easiest way to shrink the box is to move our queen over 1 square to D2. Now the queen cuts off the D file, still cuts off the second rank, and the black king is in a much smaller box than he was just 1 move ago. So now let's look at the scenario where the king moves further away from our king. So the natural way to close the box here would be to play queen to D3, but the black king would capture it. So now the easiest thing to do is to actually march our king up next to the queen, and our king is helping out by guarding this square B3. So even though we don't have the A3 square guarded, essentially we are still guarding the whole D file and the whole third rank because the black king cannot get over to the square in 1 turn. And the black king has a box that is smaller than the previous move. And currently the white queen also guards this B4 square. So in this position, the black king has to give up ground. Now the easiest thing to do is to use the queen to shrink the box. So I like to look at the queen first. Can the queen shrink the box? If she cannot shrink it, use the king to help. In this case, we can put the queen up on D4, guarding the whole 4th rank, and guarding the D file. The black king has a pretty small box. Now this king must move backwards. Now we see the queen and king are separated. So another good point to remember is the king and queen will usually work the most efficiently if they're working together. So even though you could put the queen out here and try to shrink the box with just your queen, it's much more efficient to bring the king up. So I look for the queen first, but not if she has to give up some ground. So queen out to E5 is actually giving up some squares on the D file. So let's bring the king in to help. Now we see that we can use the queen to shrink the box. She guards the C file. She guards the 4th rank. The box for the black king is very small. Now an important thing to note is whenever you see the opponent's king reach the edge of the board, you need to be on stalemate alert. Be very careful about stalemates here. So typically what I like to do as soon as I see the king reach the edge of the board, I try to put the queen on the adjacent rank or file to keep their king trapped on that edge of the board, but also make sure that the opponent's king has at least 2 squares to move back and forth so that it won't be a stalemate. So here we have queen b4 check. The king is in check. The queen guards this square, and all these squares on the B file. And if you look at how many squares the black king has available, A8, A7, and A6, there are 3 squares available, so the stalemate risk is actually very low. Once we have the king trapped on the edge of the board, the easiest way to complete the checkmate is to get our king closer and then use the queen to provide the final checkmate move. So we don't need to move the queen until it's the last move for checkmate. So we'll bring our king in closer. The black king is just waiting on those 3 squares. Now that our king helps guard these squares on the b file next to the black king, we can start to look for checkmates. In this position, we have a checkmate by putting our queen on b7, checking the black king, and guarding all the squares that king could potentially move to, and the queen is defended by our own king. So that's a checkmate. That concludes part 6 of our series. We'll see you in the next video.